The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, marked a pivotal moment in the French Revolution, as a mob of Parisians, fueled by revolutionary fervour and desperation, breached the fortress prison, releasing only 7 inmates, but symbolically shattering the absolute monarchy's grip on France. The fall of the Bastille sent shockwaves throughout the country, as news of the event spread like wildfire, inspiring similar uprisings in other cities and towns. As the crowd surged forward, the governor of the Bastille, Bernard de Launay, refused to surrender, and the ensuing battle resulted in the deaths of 98 attackers and 1 defender, with the governor being beaten to death by the mob. The French historian, Jules Michelet, later wrote, "The Bastille was not just a prison, but a symbol of the absolute monarchy, and its fall marked the beginning of a new era in French history." The event was witnessed by the American diplomat, Thomas Jefferson, who was in Paris at the time, and he noted in a letter to a friend, "The scene was one of utmost chaos and disorder, with the crowd cheering and shouting as the gates of the Bastille were forced open." But to understand how we got here, we must delve into the complex web of events and circumstances that led to this momentous occasion. The financial crisis that had been plaguing France for years had reached a boiling point, with the country's debt standing at 4.5 billion livres, and the burden of taxation falling heavily on the common people, while the nobility and clergy enjoyed exemption from paying taxes. The Third Estate, which represented the commoners, was becoming increasingly frustrated with the system, and the influence of the Enlightenment thinkers, such as Rousseau and Voltaire, was spreading rapidly, inspiring people to question the authority of the monarch and the nobility. As the economic situation continued to deteriorate, the people of France became more and more desperate, and the call for reform grew louder, with the pamphleteer Camille Desmoulins writing, "The people are hungry, and they will not be silenced." The Estates General, which had not met since 1614, was convened in May 1789 in an attempt to address the financial crisis, but the representatives of the Third Estate were frustrated by the refusal of the nobility and clergy to grant them greater representation and power. As the summer of 1789 wore on, the tensions in Paris continued to build, with the National Assembly, which had been formed by the representatives of the Third Estate, adopting the tennis court oath, in which they vowed to continue their work on a new constitution, despite the king's orders to disband. The oath was taken on June 20th, 1789, and it marked a significant turning point in the revolution, as the representatives of the people were now openly defying the authority of the monarch. The journalist, Jean-Paul Marat, wrote, "The people are rising up, and they will not be silenced." The fall of the Bastille was the culmination of these events, and it marked the beginning of a new era in French history, as the people had risen up and taken control of their own destiny. The French Revolution would go on to shape European and world history, inspiring similar movements and revolutions, and leaving a lasting legacy that can still be felt today. The French historian Albert Mathiez later wrote, "The French Revolution was a complex and multifaceted event, which cannot be reduced to a single cause or explanation. The revolution was the result of a combination of factors, including the financial crisis, the influence of the Enlightenment, and the desperation of the people, who were seeking a better life and greater freedom." As the revolution progressed, it would become clear that the fall of the Bastille was not just a symbolic event, but a real turning point in the struggle for power and control in France. The people had risen up, and they would not be silenced, as the French historian Georges Lefebvre noted. The revolution was a popular movement, which was driven by the needs and aspirations of the common people. The storming of the Bastille marked the beginning of a new era in French history, and it would have far-reaching consequences, shaping the course of European and world history for centuries to come. As the news of the fall of the Bastille spread, it inspired similar uprisings in other cities and towns, and the Great Fear, a wave of panic and violence, swept across the countryside, as peasants and commoners rose up against the nobility and the feudal system. The National Assembly, which had been formed by the representatives of the Third Estate, adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which enshrined the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and marked a significant milestone in the development of modern democracy. The declaration was adopted on August 26, 1789, and it would go on to inspire similar documents and movements around the world. The French Revolution was a complex and multifaceted event, which cannot be reduced to a single cause or explanation, but its impact on European and world history is undeniable, and its legacy can still be felt today. The fall of the Bastille marked the beginning of a new era in French history, and it would have far-reaching consequences, shaping the course of European and world history for centuries to come. In the years leading up to 1789, France stood at a precipice, a nation teetering between the remnants of feudalism and the promise of modernity. The air crackled with tension, a palpable energy that coursed through the streets of Paris. As the sun rose over the sprawling city, the cries of street vendors mingled with the laughter of children playing in the alleys. Yet beneath this vibrant surface lay a deep-seated discontent. A financial crisis had gripped the nation, with the royal coffers nearly empty, and the debt had ballooned to an astonishing 4.5 billion livres, a figure that seemed insurmountable. The common people felt this burden most acutely. Bread, the staple of life, had become a luxury. In 1788, the price of a loaf had risen to nearly a quarter of a labourer's daily wage, an untenable situation that left many families to go hungry. It was during this year that Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, uttered her infamous words, suggesting that the people should eat cake if they could not find bread. These words would echo through the revolution as a symbol of the disconnect between the monarchy and its subjects, highlighting the privilege enjoyed by the aristocracy while the common folk struggled to survive. The Estates General, convened in May of 1789, due to the financial crisis, brought together representatives from the three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. In this assembly, the Third Estate, comprised mainly of the bourgeoisie and peasants, began to voice their grievances. Among them was a passionate advocate for social reform, Emmanuel Joseph C.S. His pamphlet, What is the Third Estate?, published in January 1789, argued that the Third Estate was the true strength of France, contributing to the nation's economy while being burdened by taxes and exclusion from political power. What is the Third Estate, he wrote? Everything. What has it been until now in the political order? Nothing. What does it demand? To become something. His words resonated deeply with a populace yearning for change. The political atmosphere was charged with the ideas of the Enlightenment, a movement that championed reason, individual rights, and the questioning of authority. Philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Voltaire ignited the imaginations of the French, advocating for liberty and equality. Their writings spread through salons and pamphlets, shaping the thoughts of the educated bourgeoisie. Rousseau, in his work The Social Contract, posited that legitimate political authority rested on the consent of the governed, a radical notion that would challenge the very foundations of absolute monarchy. In the backdrop of this ideological upheaval stood figures who would become pivotal in the unfolding drama of revolution. Maximilien Robespierre, a young lawyer with a fierce dedication to justice, emerged as a prominent voice in the National Assembly. His unwavering belief in the principles of the revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, drove him to advocate for the rights of the common man. Robespierre fervently argued for the abolition of the death penalty, believing that the state should not have the power to take life. Yet, as the revolution progressed, his ideals would become more complicated, and his name would be forever linked to the Reign of Terror. Alongside him was Georges Danton, a charismatic orator with a penchant for theatrics. Danton's magnetic personality drew crowds, his speeches igniting fires of passion among the masses. He understood the power of rhetoric and used it to rally support for the revolution. Revolution is the cause of all good, he declared, emphasizing the necessity of change in a nation shackled by oppression. Yet, Danton was also pragmatic, recognizing the need for stability amidst the chaos that would soon envelop France. As the Third Estate began to assert its power, a pivotal moment came on June 17, 1789, when they proclaimed themselves the National Assembly. This act was not just a declaration of intent, It was a challenge to the authority of King Louis XVI, who had been struggling to maintain control. The king's indecisiveness only fueled the flames of rebellion. On June 20th, when the assembly found itself locked out of its usual meeting place, members gathered in a nearby tennis court, pledging not to disband until a new constitution was established. This tennis court oath was a bold statement of defiance, encapsulating the spirit of the revolution that was beginning to unfurl. On the other side of this growing unrest was Louis XVI, a monarch caught in a web of his own making. He was well-meaning but ineffectual, a ruler who struggled to grasp the severity of his nation's plight. His attempts to implement reforms were often met with resistance from the privileged classes, who feared losing their status and wealth. Louis often vacillated between granting concessions and holding firm to the traditions of absolute monarchy. In the summer of 1789, he issued a call to arms for troops to encircle Paris, a decision that would only heighten tensions and lead to further unrest. The streets of Paris were alive with the sounds of revolution. In the taverns and cafes, discussions about rights, equality, and the future of France filled the air. The common people, once passive subjects of the crown, became energized, their voices rising in unison against the injustices they faced. The cries for liberté, égalité, fraternité began to resonate not just in the salons, but in the very heart of the populace. It was this collective yearning for change that would ignite the revolutionary fervor that swept through France. Amidst this backdrop of unrest, a sense of urgency spread. The summer of 1789 was marked by violent riots. In July, the price of bread soared even higher, pushing the already desperate populace closer to the brink. A group of angry citizens stormed the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall of Paris, demanding bread and justice. The cries of the people echoed through the streets, a chorus of anguish and frustration that could no longer be ignored. The situation escalated as rumors spread of royal troops marching towards the city, intensifying fears of a crackdown on the revolutionaries. On July 14th, 1789, the storming of the Bastille became a defining moment in the revolution. The fortress prison, a symbol of royal tyranny, stood as a bastion of oppression in the heart of Paris. For the people, it represented the very embodiment of the monarchy's power. That morning, a crowd of about 800 gathered outside its gates, armed with makeshift weapons and an unyielding resolve. They demanded the release of political prisoners and the surrender of the fortress's arms. The governor of the Bastille, Bernard de Launay, found himself in a precarious position, caught between the royal authority he served and the furious citizens clamoring for their rights. When the gates of the Bastille were finally breached, chaos erupted. The defenders, outnumbered and outmatched, were overwhelmed. The fighting was fierce, and by the end of the day, the fall of the Bastille was marked by the deaths of 98 attackers and 1 defender. The news of this victory spread like wildfire, igniting a wave of revolutionary fervor across France. The Bastille, which once stood as an intimidating symbol of oppression, was transformed into a monument of liberty. The aftermath of the storming of the Bastille sent shockwaves through the monarchy as the people began to realize their power. The king's authority was now visibly challenged, and the revolution had gained momentum. In the days that followed, Paris became a cauldron of revolutionary activity. Citizens formed militias, and the National Assembly began to take steps toward drafting a new constitution that would redefine the relationship between the state and its citizens. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was proclaimed, enshrining the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity into the ideals of the new France. Yet, as the revolution unfolded, the complexities of its nature became apparent. It was not merely a struggle for rights, it was also a battle for identity. The revolutionaries grappled with questions of what it meant to be French in a rapidly changing world. The ideals of the Enlightenment, once clear and invigorating, began to clash with the harsh realities of governance and societal divisions. The tension between the revolutionary leaders and the common people grew, as the initial fervor started to give way to factionalism and infighting. As the dust settled from the storming of the Bastille, the world was irrevocably changed. The revolution unleashed forces that would reshape not only France, but the entire globe. The ideals born in the hearts of ordinary citizens would inspire movements for change across continents, echoing in the cries for freedom in places as distant as Haiti and beyond. The legacy of the French Revolution would extend far beyond its borders, influencing the development of democratic institutions and the rise of nationalism. In the quiet aftermath of those tumultuous days, the people of France began to understand that their struggle was not merely against a monarchy, but for the very essence of what it meant to be human. The revolution was a complex tapestry, woven from the threads of hope, despair, ambition, and fear. It was a moment in history when the dreams of the oppressed began to take flight, setting the stage for a legacy that would resonate through the ages, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a people yearning for liberty, equality, and fraternity. The tumultuous waves of the French Revolution surged, carrying with them the aspirations and fears of a nation on the brink of transformation. In the spring of 1791, as the Parisian streets thrummed with a restless energy, the revolutionary fervour that had ignited the fall of the Bastille now spread like wildfire. Ideas of liberty and equality hung heavy in the air, echoing through cafes and salons where intellectuals, artisans, and citizens gathered to debate the future of their country. The National Assembly, formed in the wake of the Estates General, had begun to draft the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This document, adopted on August 26th, proclaimed, "Men are born and remain free and equal in rights." It was a declaration that resonated deeply, inspiring hopes of a new social order. Yet, amid the fervent discussions, uncertainty loomed large. The revolutionary leaders faced a daunting task: how to transform the lofty ideals of the Enlightenment into tangible change. Maximilien Robespierre, a key figure in the National Assembly, emerged as an ardent advocate for the people. The aim of all political association is the preservation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man, he declared, his voice firm, his vision clear. But as the Assembly wrestled with issues of governance, the threat of counter-revolutionary forces simmered just beneath the surface. In the summer of 1791, the political landscape shifted dramatically. King Louis XVI and his family attempted to flee Paris, seeking refuge in the royalist stronghold of Varennes. Their flight was a desperate bid for power, but it ended in failure. On June 20th, they were captured and brought back to the city, their attempted escape shattering any remaining illusions of loyalty among the populace. The king's betrayal fueled anger and despair, leading many to see him as a symbol of the oppressive past. An anonymous pamphlet circulated, daringly proclaiming, "The king is a traitor." As the citizens of Paris processed the news, the atmosphere became charged with both fear and determination. The fall of the monarchy seemed imminent, as the National Assembly took increasingly bold steps. By September, they declared the creation of the French Republic. The old order crumbled, and the cries of liberté, égalité, fraternité rang through the streets, mingling with the distant sound of drums and the rattle of revolutionary fervour. The once feared Bastille had fallen, but the revolution was far from complete. The question of governance remained unresolved, and factions began to form within the Assembly itself. Jacobins and Girondins, two influential groups, emerged, each with differing visions for the future. The Jacobins, led by Robespierre, pushed for radical reforms. The Girondins, more moderate in their approach, favoured a slower, more cautious transition. The schism between these factions deepened, igniting fierce debates that often led to violence. Political clubs became centres of passion and rivalry. The Jacobin Club, meeting in the former convent of the Jacobins, thrummed with energy as members rallied behind the ideals of direct democracy and social justice. "The people's will must be expressed," one member thundered, stirring applause and fervent agreement. At the same time, the Girondins, with their more moderate views, sought to maintain some semblance of stability amidst the chaos. Their voices, however, began to be drowned out by the growing radicalism of the Jacobins. As tensions rose, the plight of the common people remained ever present. Bread prices had skyrocketed, reaching alarming heights. The cost of a loaf had nearly tripled since 1788. Hunger gnawed at the bellies of the citizens, and desperation fueled unrest. In the summer of 1792, bread riots erupted in Paris as the populace clamoured for relief. the sound of angry protests echoed through the streets. "We want bread," they cried, their demands punctuating the air with urgency. The revolutionary leaders faced a critical choice. Would they heed the calls of the people, or risk losing their support entirely? In the background loomed the spectre of foreign intervention. Austria and Prussia, alarmed by the revolutionary fervour spreading across Europe, threatened to invade France to restore the monarchy. This external pressure compounded the internal strife, igniting fears of invasion and civil war. On August 10, 1792, the tensions reached a breaking point when an armed crowd stormed the Tuileries Palace, demanding the arrest of the king. The palace guards were overwhelmed, and Louis XVI was taken captive. The monarchy was effectively dismantled, and the revolutionaries took control, declaring that the Republic was the only path forward. The summer of 1792 was a crucible for the revolution, leading to the establishment of the National Convention, which would replace the National Assembly. This new body was tasked with drafting a new constitution and navigating the tumultuous waters of revolution. The convention convened in September, amid the fervent cries of the people. The winds of change swept through Paris, and the populace celebrated the fall of the monarchy with a fervour that had not been seen before. The air was thick with the smell of smoke from the bonfires ignited in celebration, as citizens rejoiced in their newfound freedom. However, the triumph was short-lived. The September massacres unfolded, a tragic series of killings where revolutionaries, fearing a royalist uprising, executed prisoners in Parisian jails. In the chaos, approximately 1,400 inmates lost their lives. The brutality of the moment shook the very foundations of the revolution. Robespierre, witnessing the violence, grappled with the implications of such actions. "Terror is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible," he would later assert, laying the groundwork for a reign of terror that would envelop France. As the National Convention began its work, the question of the king's fate loomed ominously. On December 11, 1792, Louis XVI stood trial for treason. The courtroom buzzed with tension, and the stakes could not have been higher. Defending himself, Louis declared, "I am the king of the French," appealing to the people's sense of loyalty. Yet, the tide had irrevocably turned against him. The convention, swayed by the fervour of the revolutionary spirit, ultimately condemned him. On January 15, 1793, he was pronounced guilty, and on January 21, he faced the guillotine. The execution marked a watershed moment in the revolution, symbolizing not just the end of a monarchy, but also the birth of a new political order, one that was increasingly radical and tumultuous. In the wake of Louis's death, the revolution continued to spiral, and the Committee of Public Safety was established to protect the Republic from both internal and external threats. Led by Robespierre, the committee wielded extraordinary power, believing that virtue could only be achieved through terror. The Reign of Terror began in earnest, sweeping through France with a vengeance. The guillotine became a chilling symbol of revolutionary justice, claiming thousands of lives, including those of former allies turned enemies. The streets of Paris became suffused with fear, and the once joyous cries of freedom morphed into desperate pleas for safety. The impact of the revolution reverberated far beyond France's borders. Ideas of liberty and equality began to take root across Europe and the world, inspiring other movements and uprisings. The Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791, echoed the revolutionary fervour of France, as enslaved people fought for their freedom. The radical ideals of the revolution, however, also ignited counter-revolutionary forces, leading to wars across the continent. The rise of nationalism surged, and the spectre of self-determination began to loom large, reshaping the political landscape of Europe. As the revolution continued to evolve, the question of what it meant to be French transformed dramatically. The principles of citizenship began to take shape, emphasizing the rights and responsibilities of individuals. The term citizen gained new significance, signifying not just a legal status, but an active participation in the affairs of the state. The phrase, "the sovereignty of the people," became a rallying cry, echoing through the halls of the National Convention and beyond. The revolutionaries sought to dismantle old hierarchies and forge a new identity rooted in the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The complexities of the revolution, however, were not lost on those living through it. The idealism of the early days began to fracture under the weight of violence and betrayal. Revolutionary leaders grappled with the enormity of their decisions, their fates entwined with the very ideals they had once championed. As Robespierre stated, "He who wants to be a leader must be willing to die." The stakes were high, and the consequences of failure loomed ominously. By the summer of 1794, the Reign of Terror reached its zenith. The guillotine claimed its most notable victims, including Georges Danton, once a prominent voice for moderation. As the blood flowed, the revolutionary spirit began to wane. Robespierre, once hailed as a champion of the revolution, now faced growing opposition. On July 27, 1794, he was arrested by his fellow revolutionaries. The very ideals he had once fought to uphold now threatened to consume him. The following day, he met his end at the guillotine, a poignant reminder of the revolution's capacity for self-destruction. The fall of Robespierre marked a turning point in the revolution, signaling the beginning of a new phase. The National Convention sought to distance itself from the excesses of the Terror, culminating in the establishment of the Thermidorian reaction. The revolution, once a beacon of hope, now teetered on the edge of chaos. Yet the ideals born from those early fervent days would not be easily extinguished. In the years that followed, the remnants of the revolution played a crucial role in shaping the future of France. The new constitution established a directory, a government that sought to stabilize the nation in the wake of the Terror. Yet, the political landscape remained fraught with tension and division. The revolutionary fervor that had once ignited the streets of Paris faded, but the echoes of liberty, equality, and fraternity continued to resonate throughout Europe, laying the groundwork for future movements and revolutions. The French Revolution, with all its triumphs and tragedies, ultimately transformed the course of history. It birthed ideas that would inspire generations, shaping the modern concepts of human rights, citizenship, and national identity. The rise of revolutionary fervor, the ensuing chaos, and the eventual consolidation of power left an indelible mark on France and the world. As the revolutionaries had envisioned, a new order emerged from the ashes of the old, forever changing the landscape of governance and society. Each whisper of the past reminds us of the lives intertwined in this struggle, the hopes, dreams, fears, and sacrifices of those who dared to dream of a better future. The French Revolution was not merely a series of events. It was a profound reimagining of what it meant to be human, to aspire to freedom, and to seek a place in the unfolding narrative of history. On June 20th, 1791, in the quiet of the night, King Louis XVI and his family slipped away from the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where the revolutionaries had placed them under increasingly watchful eyes. Their destination was Varennes, a small town about 160 miles away, where they hoped to find refuge with loyal supporters and regroup for a counter-revolution. Yet, the plan was fraught with peril. As they travelled in a heavily guarded coach, the king wore a disguise, but his unmistakable profile was recognized by a local postmaster, who sent a message to Paris. The king's attempt to escape was a desperate gamble, one that would change the course of the revolution and deepen the chasm between the monarchy and the revolutionaries. By the time they reached Varennes, the news had spread like wildfire through the revolutionary ranks. The king had fled, abandoning his people in a time of crisis, and the revolutionary fervor turned into outrage. On June 21st, crowds gathered in Paris, fueled by anger and betrayal. Camille Desmoulins, a fervent journalist and one of the revolution's voices, captured the tumult in his writings, declaring, "The king has fled. We are no longer his subjects, but his jailers." This sentiment reverberated through the streets, igniting a firestorm of resistance against a king who no longer seemed fit to govern. The royal family's return to Paris was swift but humiliating. They were captured in Varennes and escorted back by revolutionary troops, arriving in the capital on June 25, 1791. The sight of the king, once the embodiment of royal authority, now reduced to a prisoner, shattered any remaining illusions of loyalty among the people. The monarchy was not merely under siege, it was in crisis. Louis XVI's attempted flight and subsequent capture marked a point of no return. as the National Assembly began to question whether a constitutional monarchy could still exist in a nation that viewed its king as a traitor. The crisis deepened as the Assembly debated the king's fate. On July 15, 1791, Maximilien Robespierre, who had emerged as a leading figure within the Assembly, called for the dissolution of the monarchy altogether. A king can no longer reign over a people who have declared themselves free, he asserted, his voice ringing with the fervour of revolution. Passionate debates erupted, and the once unified revolutionary movement began to splinter into factions, each with differing visions for France's future. The Girondins, advocating for a more moderate approach, clashed with the more radical Jacobins, who sought immediate and sweeping changes. The pressure from the streets of Paris was relentless. A crowd gathered at the Champ de Mars on July 17, 1791, demanding the king's deposition. As tensions escalated, the National Guard, led by Lafayette, sought to disperse the crowd. The atmosphere turned volatile, shots rang out, and chaos erupted. In the aftermath, the Assembly reported that 50 people lay dead, their blood staining the grass as the revolutionary ideal of liberty clashed violently with the reality of civil unrest. The massacre at the Champ de Mars solidified the divide between the moderates and the radicals, with the Jacobins rallying their supporters to denounce the bloodshed and call for justice against the monarchy. Meanwhile, the plight of the common people worsened. Food shortages became acute as grain prices soared amidst the chaos of revolution. In Paris, the price of a loaf of bread had risen to over 14 sous, forcing many families into dire straits. The memory of the starving masses lingered in the minds of the people, making the monarchy a target for their frustrations. The cries for liberté, égalité, fraternité echoed through the streets, but the promise of equality felt distant as hunger gnawed at the bellies of the poor. Amidst this turmoil, a new power emerged: the sans-culottes, a radical group of working-class men and women who would become the backbone of the revolutionary movement. They wore long trousers instead of the knee breeches favoured by the aristocracy, symbolising their break from the old order. On August 10, 1792, emboldened by their growing strength, they stormed the Tuileries Palace, demanding the king's abdication. Louis XVI's guards, outnumbered and outmatched, surrendered. The king and his family were once again taken captive, this time by the very people he had sought to escape. As the sun set on that fateful day, the revolution took a darker turn. The storming of the Tuileries Palace marked the end of the king's authority. The monarchy was abolished, and the First French Republic was proclaimed. Yet, the cost was staggering. In the days that followed, the prisons filled with suspected royalists, and the reign of terror loomed on the horizon. The revolutionary leaders, intoxicated by power and the urgency of their cause, enacted the September massacres, killing an estimated 1,200 prisoners in a frenzied purge of perceived enemies of the revolution. Maximilien Robespierre, who had once spoken passionately about liberty and justice, began to play a pivotal role in this descent into violence. He and his allies argued that the revolution could only survive through radical measures. Terror is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible, he famously declared, justifying the bloodshed that would soon engulf the nation. By mid-1793, the guillotine became a symbol of the revolution, as thousands faced execution in the name of preserving the Republic. The human cost of the revolution was staggering. According to estimates, around 40,000 people were executed during the Reign of Terror, while many more were imprisoned or forced into exile. Among those who lost their heads was Georges Danton, once a close ally of Robespierre, who fell victim to the very terror he had helped instigate. His last words, delivered before the guillotine, were a haunting reminder of the revolution's brutality. "Show my head to the people, it is worth seeing." While the revolutionaries sought to construct a new society based on the principles of liberty and equality, the reality was a landscape marred by fear and bloodshed. The ideals that had ignited the revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, adopted on August 26, 1789, seemed to fade amidst the chaos. The revolutionary fervour that had promised hope and change now felt like a spectre haunting France. As the conflict escalated, France found itself embroiled in wars against Austria and Prussia, who feared the spread of revolutionary ideas across their borders. On April 20th, 1792, the National Assembly declared war, believing that a swift victory would unite the nation and rally support for the revolutionary cause. Instead, the war exposed deep divisions within France. The defeat at the Battle of Verdun in September 1792 sent shockwaves through the revolutionary government, and the streets of Paris once again filled with cries for action. By 1793, the revolution was at a crossroads. The Girondins, once in power, were ousted by the Jacobins, leading to a bloody power struggle. Robespierre's grip tightened, and he began to purge anyone he perceived as a threat. The revolutionary ideals that had once united the people began to fracture. The cries of liberty, equality, fraternity turned into a desperate plea for survival, as friends became enemies and neighbors turned against one another. The revolution's legacy was now intertwined with violence, and the very fabric of society was being torn apart. The streets of Paris rang with the sounds of the guillotine, and the air was thick with the scent of fear and uncertainty. Each day brought new challenges, new betrayals, and new sacrifices. The dream of a republic built on the ashes of a monarchy now teetered on the brink of collapse. As the human cost of the revolution mounted, the question loomed ever larger. Would the ideals of liberty and equality endure, or would they be consumed by the flames of terror and chaos? The fate of France hung in the balance, with every decision leading to the next crisis, and every action shaping the future of a nation in turmoil. The revolution was far from over. It was entering its most dangerous phase, where the line between justice and revenge blurred, and the ideals of the Enlightenment faced their greatest test. In the twilight of 1792, France stood at a precipice. The fervor of revolution was palpable, and the air thrummed with anticipation. On September 20th, the French army faced the formidable forces of the Austrians and Prussians at the Battle of Valmy, a confrontation that would become a defining moment in the French Revolution. The revolutionary fervor had transformed the once disparate volunteers into a disciplined army, united not just by the cause of liberty, but by the existential threat posed by foreign monarchies intent on quelling the insurrection. On that crisp autumn morning, the sound of cannons echoed against the hills, reverberating through the hearts of the soldiers. General Francois Kellerman, commanding the revolutionary forces, understood the stakes. Today, we fight not just for our lives, but for the very idea of France, he proclaimed, rallying his troops. The armies clashed fiercely, yet it was not merely a contest of arms. The French soldiers, emboldened by their conviction, held their ground. For them, this was not a battle of territory. It was a war for the soul of a nation. With every cannon blast, the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity surged through the ranks like a living pulse. "They shall not pass," shouted a young volunteer named Lucien, his eyes alight with fervor as he aimed his musket toward the advancing enemy lines. His brother was among those who had perished in the earlier skirmishes, and his grief transformed into a fierce determination. The cries of the wounded mingled with the roar of gunfire, and in that chaos, a new France was being forged. The tide of battle turned in favor of the French when reinforcements arrived, their banners fluttering like the hopes of a nation. By day's end, the coalition forces had retreated, their ranks broken. The victory at Valmy was not just a military success. It signified the triumph of revolutionary ideals over the old order. The French, once seen as mere rabble, had proven their resolve. As the sun sank low, casting a golden hue over the battlefield, the soldiers raised their voices in unison, singing the Marseillaise, a song that would become the anthem of the revolution. Meanwhile, in Paris, the political landscape was shifting with equal intensity. The National Assembly, still reeling from internal conflicts, moved to declare France a republic on September 21, 1792. The notion of a republic, where sovereignty rested not with a king, but with the people, ignited passions across the nation. Camille Desmoulins, a fervent supporter of the revolutionary cause, stood before a gathering of citizens, his voice steady and impassioned. "Let us not lose sight of our ideals. The monarchy is no more. We are the masters of our fate." The crowd, electrified by his words, erupted in cheers, their spirits buoyed by the promise of self-governance. Yet, amidst this surge of hope, the spectre of violence loomed. The September massacres soon unfolded, as paranoia and fear gripped the city. Many believed that the prisoners held in the dungeons of Paris were counter-revolutionaries plotting against the Republic. In the span of just a few days, between September 2nd and 6th, over 1,000 prisoners were executed, their blood staining the hands of those who claimed to fight for justice. Maximilien Robespierre, who had emerged as a leading figure within the revolutionary movement, justified these actions with chilling resolve. Terror is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. His words echoed through the halls of power, signifying a shift towards a more radical approach to governance. As autumn deepened, Marie Antoinette, the queen now imprisoned in the Temple fortress, watched as the world outside her window transformed into a battleground of ideologies. Once, she had been the epitome of opulence, surrounded by the splendor of Versailles. Now, she was a symbol of the monarchy's decay. On October 16, 1793, her fate would be sealed. In the quiet moments before her execution, she reflected on the life she had led, filled with grandeur and privilege. "I was born to be a queen," she whispered, as the weight of her impending death settled upon her. The guillotine awaited her, a grim reaper for the old regime. The revolutionary leaders were not immune to the tides of change. Robespierre, once hailed as a champion of the people, found himself ensnared in the very terror he had unleashed. The Reign of Terror, which began in earnest in 1793, aimed to root out enemies of the revolution. Under the Committee of Public Safety, thousands were executed, their cries echoing through the cobbled streets of Paris. The echoes of the past haunted the revolutionaries as they became the very monsters they sought to destroy. In June 1794, Robespierre himself would face the guillotine, a victim of the very ideology he had propagated. The revolution devoured its children, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. As the revolution progressed, the ideals of liberty and equality began to clash with the grim realities of governance. The Constitution of 1793 was adopted, promising rights to all citizens, yet the reality was starkly different. The economic crisis deepened, bread prices soared, and food shortages became commonplace. The government struggled to maintain order as discontent simmered among the populace. On January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was executed, a moment that sent shockwaves through Europe. "I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge," he declared, facing the guillotine with a calm demeanor. His death marked the definitive end of the monarchy and further solidified the Republic's resolve. In the wake of such tumult, the revolutionary fervor began to mutate. The ideals that once united the people started to fracture into factions, each vying for control. The Girondins and the Jacobins emerged as competing forces, with the latter gaining prominence under Robespierre's influence. The tension between these factions erupted into violence, culminating in the purge of the Girondins in June 1793. The atmosphere was thick with betrayal, as former allies turned against one another, each believing their vision of the revolution was the only path forward. The tumult of the revolution was not limited to Paris. In the provinces, the influence of revolutionary ideas sparked uprisings and insurrections. In the Vendée, a royalist stronghold, the populace rose against the government, leading to brutal reprisals. By 1794, the conflict had escalated into a civil war, with tens of thousands of lives lost. The revolutionary government, desperate to quash dissent, enacted the law of 22 Prairial, which expedited the process of trials and executions. In just a few months, thousands would meet the same fate as the king and queen, their heads falling beneath the blade of the guillotine. As the revolution spiraled into chaos, the ideals that had inspired so many began to feel increasingly distant. The promise of a republic, solidified by the blood of martyrs, seemed overshadowed by the spectre of tyranny. The despotism of the Committee of Public Safety bred disillusionment, as citizens realized that the revolution had become a paradox. Liberty was replaced by fear, fraternity turned into suspicion. The revolutionaries, who had once stood united for a common cause, now found themselves trapped in a web of their own making. In the midst of this turmoil, a new figure emerged, one who would rise from the ashes of revolution. Napoleon Bonaparte, a young general who had gained fame for his military prowess, quickly became a key player in shaping the future of France. Following the chaos of the Reign of Terror, he capitalized on the instability, presenting himself as a stabilizing force. By 1799, as the revolution began to wane, Napoleon staged a coup d'état, overthrowing the Directory and establishing himself as first consul. "I have a mission to accomplish," he declared, his ambitions set on restoring order and expanding France's influence across Europe. As the dust began to settle, the echoes of the revolution continued to reverberate through history. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, once a rallying cry for the masses, transformed into the foundation for modern democratic thought. The revolution had sparked a fire that could not be extinguished, inspiring movements for change across the globe. In Haiti, Toussaint Louverture led a successful slave revolt, declaring independence in 1804. In Russia, the ideas of the revolution would sow the seeds for future upheavals, culminating in the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. The legacy of the French Revolution is a tapestry woven from the threads of human aspiration and despair. The tragic irony is that while it sought to liberate, it also imprisoned. The faces of those who lived through this tumultuous time, Kellerman, Desmoulins, Robespierre, and even the fallen monarchs, remind us of the complexity of revolution. In their fervor, they sought a better world, but in the end, they also became entangled in the very struggles they sought to transcend. In the quiet of the night, as Paris breathed heavily with the weight of its past, the ideals of the revolution lingered in the hearts of its citizens. It was a lesson learned through bloodshed and sacrifice, that true liberty requires vigilance, and that the fight for justice is often fraught with peril. As the world turned, the story of the French Revolution would endure, a reminder of the power of collective action, the fragility of freedom, and the eternal quest for human dignity. The echoes of the guillotine's blade still reverberated through the cobbled streets of Paris as the dust settled on a revolution that had taken both lives and ideals in its sweeping grip. The dramatic fall of the monarchy had left a profound void, one that demanded both reconstruction and reckoning. In the wake of King Louis XVI's execution on January 21, 1793, a sense of uncertainty enveloped France. Louis's death marked not just the end of a king, but the end of an era, as the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity collided with the harsh realities of governance and societal upheaval. In the aftermath, the faces of the revolutionaries reflected a mix of triumph and trepidation. Maximilien Robespierre, now a leading figure in the Committee of Public Safety, stood at a crossroads. He had championed the revolution, calling for the rights of man and the abolition of the old order. Yet, with the monarchy gone, the challenge of stabilizing a nation in turmoil loomed large. The streets of Paris were filled with uncertainty. The revolution had unleashed a torrent of passions, and the spectre of counter-revolutionary forces lurked in the shadows. As spring approached, the country was still reeling from the shock of Louis's execution. In March 1793, civil war erupted in the Vendée, a region that had remained loyal to the crown. Here, peasants rose against the revolutionary government, driven by a mixture of loyalty to the king and resentment toward the new regime. Tens of thousands would perish in the ensuing conflict. Estimates suggest that up to 250,000 people lost their lives in the Vendée War alone. The bloodshed was a stark reminder that the revolution had birthed not only hope, but also deep divisions within French society. The revolutionary government sought to consolidate its power, and the Reign of Terror began to unfold. The Committee of Public Safety, under Robespierre's leadership, enacted sweeping measures to eliminate perceived enemies of the revolution. The law of suspects, passed in September 1793, authorized the arrest of anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activities. The guillotine, once a symbol of liberation, transformed into an instrument of fear. In just a few months, the number of executions surged. By mid-1794, around 16,000 had met their fate on the scaffold. The streets of Paris became a theatre of terror, where the cries of the condemned mingled with the fervent chants of revolutionary fervor. Among the victims was Georges Danton, once a prominent voice for the revolution. In March 1794, Danton and his followers were accused of treason, and just like that, the man who had inspired crowds with his impassioned speeches was silenced. "Show my head to the people. It is worth seeing," he famously declared, a testament to the tragic irony of a revolution that consumed its own. Danton's execution sent shockwaves through the revolutionary ranks, reinforcing the notion that no one was safe from the relentless grip of the terror. Yet, even as the blood flowed, the revolutionary government sought to reshape French society. The Festival of the Supreme Being, held on June 8, 1794, showcased the revolutionary zeal, as Robespierre aimed to create a new civic religion to replace the old. Thousands gathered for the grand procession, adorned in white, celebrating the virtues of the Republic. But the spectacle masked the growing discontent among the populace, who were weary of bloodshed and chaos. Many yearned for stability, for the promise of a new world to be fulfilled, without the constant threat of violence. The culmination of the Reign of Terror came with the fall of Robespierre himself. On July 27, 1794, as the National Convention convened, whispers of dissent against his authoritarian rule grew louder. The man who had once stood as the champion of the revolution now faced the wrath of those who feared his power. The following day, Robespierre was arrested, his fate sealed. On July 28th, he was executed without trial, his head falling under the very blade that had symbolized justice in the eyes of the revolutionaries. His last words, "Down with the tyrants," echoed through the chambers, a haunting reminder of the revolution's capacity for self-destruction. After Robespierre's death, France entered a period known as the Thermidorian reaction, characterized by a backlash against the excesses of the terror. The National Convention dismantled the oppressive mechanisms of the Committee of Public Safety, and a sense of cautious optimism began to creep into the once chaotic streets of Paris. Yet, the revolution was far from over. The economic situation remained dire. Food shortages continued to plague the nation, and inflation rendered the currency nearly worthless. In 1795, a loaf of bread cost an average worker an entire day's wage, a stark reminder of the struggles that lay ahead. In this turbulent landscape, the Directory emerged as the new governing body, but it too faced significant challenges. Established in November 1795, the Directory was marked by corruption and inefficiency. The promise of the revolution had dimmed, and many sought a return to stability, even if it meant sacrificing some of the hard-won freedoms. The disillusionment was palpable. Former revolutionaries found themselves at odds with the ideals that had once driven them. Camille Desmoulins, a key player in the early days of the revolution, lamented in his writings, "The revolution devours its children," a poignant reflection on the tragic fate of those who had fought for change. The spectre of Napoleon Bonaparte loomed larger as France grappled with its identity. By 1799, the political instability and economic hardship created fertile ground for a strong leader to emerge. Napoleon, who had gained fame for his military prowess, staged a coup d'état, seizing control of the government. On November 9, 1799, he installed himself as first consul, marking the end of the revolution and the beginning of a new chapter in French history. The ideals of the revolution seemed to fade into the background, supplanted by the ambitions of a single man. As the revolution's aftermath unfolded, its legacy began to crystallize. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, adopted in 1789, remained a cornerstone of modern democratic thought. Its principles inspired movements across the globe, from the Haitian Revolution, which sought to abolish slavery and establish independence, to the waves of nationalism that would sweep through Europe in the decades to follow. The echoes of those early revolutionary dreams persisted, igniting the aspirations of countless individuals yearning for freedom and justice. In the years that followed, the revolution would be both celebrated and vilified. Historians and political thinkers debated its merits and failures, often drawing conflicting conclusions about its impact. Some viewed it as a heroic struggle for human rights and dignity, while others saw it as a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked zealotry. The complexities of the revolution resonated in the hearts of those who lived through it, a testament to the transformative power of ideas and the harsh realities of their implementation. In the quiet corners of Paris, survivors of the tumult reflected on the lives lost and the dreams dashed. The revolution had promised so much, yet it had also exacted a heavy toll. Families mourned their dead, while others rebuilt their lives amidst the remnants of a shattered society. The old order had crumbled, and the new one was still taking shape. The streets of Paris, once filled with the fervor of revolutionary chants, were now tinged with a sense of cautious hope, as citizens yearned for a future that honored the sacrifices made in the name of liberty. Amidst the ruins of the old world, new voices began to emerge. Women, who had played vital roles in the revolution, continued to advocate for their rights. Figures like Olympe de Gouges, who had been executed for her outspoken views on gender equality, became symbols of the struggle for women's rights. The revolution had ignited a fire that could not be easily extinguished, and as whispers of reform spread, the notion of equality began to take root in the consciousness of the nation. The legacy of the French Revolution would endure, shaping the course of modern history. Its ideals inspired revolutions in the Americas, in Europe, and beyond. The echoes of the past served as both a guide and a warning, reminding future generations of the complexities of change. As the world turned, the lessons learned from the upheaval in France would resonate across borders, reminding humanity of the delicate balance between freedom and order. And so, as the years stretched into the 19th century, France stood at a new threshold. The revolution had forged a nation that would continue to grapple with its identity, its values, and its place in the world. It had been a journey marked by pain and triumph, by sacrifice and hope. The ideals of the revolution, while often tested, remained a beacon for those who dared to dream of a better future. A future where the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity could finally take root and flourish. In the quiet of reflection, as the sun set over Paris, the spirit of the revolution lingered in the air, a reminder that the fight for justice and dignity was far from over. The revolution had ended, but its legacy was just beginning to unfold. The French Revolution, a time of fervent ideals and violent upheavals, cast a long shadow that continues to shape our world today. In the wake of the tumult and bloodshed, the revolutionaries sought to forge a new society founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The echoes of their struggle resound through the centuries, influencing movements and ideologies that would come to define modernity. As the dust settled on the streets of Paris, the legacy of the revolution unfolded in many forms. In 1795, the revolutionary government adopted the Constitution of the Year III, establishing the Directory, a new ruling body that sought to stabilize France after years of chaos. Yet, the ideals of the revolution remained a double-edged sword, sparking fervent debates about the nature of freedom and governance. The radical spirit that had once propelled the masses into the streets now flickered in the shadows, overshadowed by the rise of authoritarianism. Historians have often viewed the revolution through different lenses, each interpretation revealing the complexity and contradictions inherent in its legacy. Jules Michelet, a passionate chronicler of the revolution, portrayed it as a heroic struggle for freedom. He wrote, "The revolution is a living force. It is the life of the people." This perspective ignited a sense of national pride and unity, fueling the belief that the revolution was a triumph of the common man against tyranny. Yet, the revolution also birthed an era of terror and bloodshed. The Reign of Terror, which claimed the lives of thousands, including the revolutionaries themselves, cast a pall over the aspirations of liberty. Maximilien Robespierre, once a champion of the revolution, became a symbol of its excesses when he declared, "Terror is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible." The guillotine, a tool of revolutionary justice, became synonymous with the loss of life and the betrayal of revolutionary ideals. By the early 19th century, the revolution's ideals began to crystallize into a powerful narrative that sought to redefine citizenship and human rights. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, adopted in 1789, laid the groundwork for modern human rights discourse. It asserted that the aim of all political association is the preservation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man. These principles resonated far beyond France's borders, inspiring liberation movements in Haiti, Latin America, and beyond. The Haitian Revolution, which erupted in 1791, served as a vivid illustration of the global impact of the French Revolution's ideals. Enslaved Africans in Saint-Domingue rose up against their oppressors, fueled by the promise of liberty that inspired their French counterparts. Toussaint Louverture emerged as a formidable leader, declaring in 1801, "Slavery is not a thing of the past. It is a reality that we must confront." The victory of the Haitian Revolution in 1804 marked the first successful slave uprising in history, establishing Haiti as the first independent black republic and demonstrating the revolutionary spirit's far-reaching consequences. In Europe, the reverberations of the French Revolution catalyzed a wave of nationalist movements. The fervor for self-determination, ignited by the revolutionaries' call for liberty, inspired intellectuals and activists to challenge empires and monarchies. The 1848 revolutions swept through the continent as people clamored for democratic reforms and national independence. Yet, these uprisings often met with harsh repression, reminding many of the revolution's darker chapters. The historian Eric Hobsbawm noted, "The revolutionary spirit was contagious, but it was also elusive, as the hopes for radical change were often dashed against the realities of power." The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who crowned himself emperor in 1804, further complicated the legacy of the revolution. Initially seen as a defender of revolutionary principles, Napoleon's authoritarian rule contrasted sharply with the ideals he professed to uphold. His expansionist ambitions across Europe sparked conflicts that would alter the geopolitical landscape, leading to the rise of nationalism in various forms. The Napoleonic Wars resulted in millions of deaths, yet they also spread revolutionary ideals throughout Europe, laying the groundwork for future movements for democracy and human rights. The 19th century saw the emergence of liberalism as a political philosophy that sought to balance individual freedoms with social responsibility. The revolution's emphasis on individual rights influenced the development of constitutional democracies in Europe and the United States. Revolutionary ideas permeated political discourse, inspiring figures like John Stuart Mill, who championed the rights of the individual against oppressive governments. In his influential work, On Liberty, Mill argued, "Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign," encapsulating the spirit of self-determination that the revolution ignited. Yet, the revolution's legacy is not without its challenges and contradictions. The rise of nationalism, while often a force for liberation, also paved the way for xenophobia and violent conflicts. The unification of Germany and Italy in the late 19th century showcased the potential for national pride to morph into militarism. The historian Eric Hobsbawm reflected on this duality, stating, "Nationalism is a powerful force, born from the ashes of revolution, but it can also consume those it seeks to uplift." In the 20th century, the revolutionary ideals of the late 18th century continued to inspire movements for social justice and equality. The suffragette movement, which fought for women's right to vote, drew upon the revolutionary principles of liberty and equality. In 1920, the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution granted women the right to vote, a victory rooted in the notion that all citizens deserve equal representation in government. The civil rights movement in the United States during the 1960s echoed the revolutionary fervor of the French Revolution, as activists sought to dismantle systemic racism and discrimination. Martin Luther King Jr., a key figure in the movement, invoked the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, stating, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." His call for justice and equality resonated with the revolutionary spirit, highlighting the enduring impact of the French Revolution on struggles for civil rights and social change. Moreover, the revolution's emphasis on secularism and the separation of church and state had profound implications for the modern world. The revolutionary government sought to diminish the influence of the Catholic Church, leading to the establishment of a secular state. This shift laid the foundation for contemporary debates surrounding religious freedom, pluralism, and the role of religion in public life. As we navigate the complexities of modern society, the legacy of the French Revolution continues to provoke reflection and debate. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity remain relevant in discussions about human rights and social justice. Yet, the revolution also serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us of the perils of extremism and the potential for revolutionary fervor to spiral into chaos. In contemporary France, the revolution's principles still resonate deeply. The motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, is emblazoned on government buildings, a testament to the enduring values forged in the fires of revolution. Yet, the nation grapples with the challenges of integrating diverse populations and addressing social inequalities, echoing the unresolved tensions that have plagued France since 1789. Historians and social theorists continue to debate the revolution's legacy, examining its complexities and contradictions. The French Revolution is both celebrated as a triumph of the human spirit and critiqued as a cautionary tale of revolutionary excess. Its impact on the modern world is undeniable, shaping the contours of democracy, nationalism, and human rights. In the quiet moments of reflection, one can ponder the lives of ordinary individuals who lived through this transformative period. The baker in Paris, struggling to provide bread for his family amid rising prices. The seamstress, inspired by the revolutionary ideals, marching for her rights. The soldier, torn between duty and the desire for freedom. Their stories, intertwined with the grand narrative of the revolution, remind us that history is not merely a succession of events, but the lived experiences of real people. The French Revolution, with all its triumphs and tragedies, remains a profound chapter in the human story. It challenges us to confront our values and aspirations, urging us to strive for a world where freedom, equality, and fraternity are not just ideals, but realities for all. As we reflect on its legacy, we must ask ourselves, what can we learn from this tumultuous past? And how can we ensure that its lessons guide us toward a more just and equitable future? The answers lie not in the grand narratives of history, but in the quiet determination of individuals who dare to dream of a better world. As we reflect upon the tumultuous tapestry of the French Revolution, we find ourselves confronted with the profound complexities of human nature. The relentless drive for ambition, the depths of love, the intoxicating allure of power, and the frailty of survival amid chaos. This epoch, marked by fervor and bloodshed, unveils the intricate dance between hope and despair, freedom and tyranny. It becomes evident that revolutions do not merely alter political structures, they unearth the raw essence of humanity itself, exposing both our noblest aspirations and our darkest impulses. At the heart of this revolution lay the cries for liberty, equality, and fraternity. These ideals ignited passions and forged bonds among the disenfranchised, as citizens sought to dismantle the shackles of an oppressive monarchy. Yet, as history reveals, the path to such noble aspirations was riddled with contradictions. In their quest for freedom, the revolutionaries often succumbed to the very tyranny they sought to overthrow. The fervent idealism of figures like Maximilien Robespierre veered into the chilling reality of the Reign of Terror, where the aspiration for a just society became a justification for bloodshed. As the guillotine claimed thousands, one might ponder, does the pursuit of a noble cause justify the means employed to achieve it? Consider the poignant stories of those who lived through this era. The ordinary citizens, the artisans, the farmers, and the women who rallied for their rights. Their dreams were often eclipsed by the harsh realities of hunger, fear, and betrayal. The price of bread soared, and with it, the desperation of the populace grew. The echoes of the revolution resounded through the cobbled streets of Paris, where hope intertwined with the stench of gunpowder and the cries of the fallen. In the face of adversity, they remained resolute, clinging to the notion that their sacrifices might pave the way for a brighter future. Their perseverance reminds us that within the human spirit lies an unyielding capacity for resilience, even amid despair. Yet, the revolution also serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of power. King Louis XVI, who once basked in the warmth of his absolute authority, became a symbol of the monarchy's vulnerability. His execution marked the demise of an era, but it also illuminated the transient nature of power. In the end, he was but a man, stripped of his crown and dignity, facing the judgment of those he once ruled. The rise and fall of leaders throughout history echo in this narrative, emphasizing that power is not a birthright, it is a precarious gift. easily lost to the tides of public sentiment and revolution. As we delve deeper into this reflection, we cannot overlook the universal themes of love and betrayal that permeated the lives of those entangled in the revolution's fervor. The bonds that once united families and friends were often severed by conflicting loyalties. The love for one's country clashed with the love for one's kin, as neighbors turned against each other in moments of desperation. The revolution became not just a battle for ideals, but also a crucible of personal relationships, testing the limits of loyalty and sacrifice. In this complex web, we observe the duality of human relationships, the capacity for both profound love and unspeakable betrayal. In contemplating the legacies left by the French Revolution, we are reminded that history is not merely a sequence of events. It is a reflection of our collective consciousness. Each chapter of this story speaks to the enduring struggle for dignity and justice that continues to resonate in modern society. The ideals of the revolution have transcended borders, inspiring movements for freedom and human rights around the globe. Yet, they also remind us of the vigilance required to safeguard these principles. For the fight against oppression is an ongoing battle, fraught with challenges and sacrifices. As you drift into sleep, let the stories of those who lived through the revolution linger in your thoughts. The echoes of their struggles and dreams remind us of our shared humanity, our capacity for ambition, love, and the relentless quest for a better world. In the quiet of the night, may their stories inspire you to reflect upon your own aspirations, the bonds you cherish, and the legacy you wish to leave behind. For in the end, it is not just the revolutions that shape history, but the hearts and minds of those who dare to dream, to love, and to fight for a future that embraces liberty and justice for all.